Hello, YouTube. This is Attorney Colin Wynn reaching out to you about a topic that I deal with on a regular basis. It's a field of law that I practice, Chapter 7 and Chapter 13 bankruptcy. A lot of people don't know the distinction. I want to kind of touch base with you guys today to kind of explain it too. Chapter 7 deals with liquidation, saying, hey, I don't have very much money or any money to pay back my debts. Please liquidate my assets if there are any. And if there aren't any, please forgive me the debts that I owe. Most of these debts are consumer debts dealing with credit cards, repoed vehicles, medical debts, even back taxes to the IRS. Those are typically the debts that people are looking to discharge, and they're actually called unsecured debts. One thing that most people don't understand in Chapter 7, or the misnomer that people believe about Chapter 7, is that they can't keep their car or whatnot. Typically, the trustee, who's the one who's kind of looking over the bankruptcy filing to see if there's any asset that they can liquidate and sell, they're only looking for homes that have equity. A lot of homes don't have any equity, especially in our time, especially if it's recently purchased. These homes, even if they have equity, if sold, would exhaust all the equity. And there are actually a few exemptions that the bankruptcy code permits in Chapter 7. So with Chapter 7, you have the homestead, which deals with your house. You can have $15,000 of equity in the trustee, which is the ones who are trying to liquidate your assets. They cannot touch. Vehicle is the same way. They usually have 2,500, and this is a federal practice of law. Sometimes certain states also have additional, but this is the federal basis. So vehicles, let's say, is worth $2,500. They're not going to go after it. Even if it's like $3,000, it's not worth their time ultimately. They are looking for big ticket items with a lot of equity, or let's say a bank account that's huge, or a tax return that's coming. Let's say $10,000. That's a huge ticket, and that's easy to get. Whereas a car that's worth $3,000, $4,000, they have to sell it. We don't know what the retail real price is until somebody purchases it and puts it on the market. Same thing with a home. You can list it for a certain price, but after taxes, transfer fees, broker fees, it can exhaust everything, and then also like anything that needs to be fixed. So that's liquidation of Chapter 7. And if you don't have any of those assets, typically the trustees aren't going to object. You're going to look, this guy doesn't have any money, and we can't sell any of his stuff, so ultimately we're going to let him wipe off his debt. Typically, it's the unsecured debt. What is unsecured debt? Unsecured debt deals with debt that if you default on, I can't, or the businesses can't take anything back from you. Like a credit card, you owe me money, but now you defaulted. What am I going to do? Try to collect money, but I can't take anything back, like a collateral. A secured debt is usually a house, a car, a boat, those things. So if you default, I can take back the house, or I can take back the car. That's secured. And typically, you can still keep your house in Chapter 7, only when, like I said, when there's no equity. If there's equity, up to a certain amount, there's $15,000 of exemption per individual on the home. So that's typically what the trustee's going to look at. If it's, you have $50,000 with equity and you're the only one on the title, then, even if they sold the house with brokerage fees and stuff like that, maybe you'll get like $15,000 back. That's worth it. If it's like 1,000 or two, it's not worth it, and they're not even sure that they're even going to get it. So usually they don't object to your bankruptcy filing and discharge. The other major bankruptcy for most consumers is Chapter 13. Chapter 13 is not what people realize is it deals with, I owe money and I need a payment plan. And the creditor, the person I owe money to, is not willing to work with me, or we can't come to a certain amount. Typically, Chapter 13, you don't have to qualify for, so your income doesn't have to be super low. However, you still have to be under a certain threshold, and your disposable income is realistically not as big of an issue. Whereas Chapter 7, they look at your finances, and if you're under a threshold of overall income, and then you have no disposable income, and you're in the red, that's a slam dunk, Chapter 7. Whereas Chapter 13, they don't really look at disposable income as much as they're looking at, overall income, if you fall under it, and a repayment plan, because typically you're repaying these debts back in Chapter 13. Unless your disposable income is so low, they will actually only make you pay 10% of unsecured debt, credit cards, medical bills, and stuff like that. So it's actually a pretty good deal for a lot of people, because let's say you owe $10,000, you only pay 10% of it back, so that's $1,000. So it's a pretty good discount. However, most people file Chapter 13 is to keep their home or their vehicle. With a home, because it's a secured debt, you're afraid creditors are going to take it back. So Chapter 7 is not very feasible, so they do Chapter 13. Chapter 13, typically they give you about 36 months, which is 3 years, to pay back the debt you owe. So they break it up along with some fees for the trustee and as well as the attorneys. That's the breakdown. 5 year. There's another one that's like 5 years. It depends on what your income is. Typically, you can do 36 months or 60 months. 60 months is 5 years. 36 is 3 years. And it really breaks down your repayment plan. If you can afford the 36 months, a lot of people do it because they want to be off the hook. Because during the time that you're in Chapter 13 bankruptcy, the 36 or the 60 months, you're under a microscope. You can't do anything financially that are big purchases without getting permission from the court. So sometimes people are just like, hey, I can pay this back in 3 years. Let me get a payment plan for 3 years. I'll pay whatever back, and then we're done. Or some people are like, hey, the payment plan's too high. Give me 5 years, 60 months, and I'll pay it back. During which time there's no interest, and the creditors can't go after you. And after you're done with a Chapter 13, typically your credit score isn't too badly affected, but that kind of varies on the case. But you're being responsible in a way to ask the court permission to help you repay these debts that the creditors aren't willing to work with you. And you want to keep your house or your car. So that's why you're asking the bankruptcy court to get involved, because the bank themselves or the lenders aren't willing to work with you. So that's usually what the main reason for Chapter 13 filing. Also, Chapter 13 disposable income isn't a big deal, but that it does come down to the issue that I mentioned before about the 10% of your unsecured debt. If your disposable income is high, then they'll make you pay back the whole amount. If your disposable income is lower, then they will only make you pay back 10%, no interest. So it can be a pretty good deal for a lot of people, and people are always afraid to file bankruptcy, but honestly, I do not think that you should question it because it's a law of the land. Individuals like Donald Trump has taken advantage of it, and now he's the president of the United States, so that says a lot. So people should not be embarrassed to file bankruptcy because it's actually a very, very feasible way out. These lenders are aware of your ability to do so, so it's kind of baked into your interest rates and all that stuff. And these laws are built to protect consumers, to allow consumers to have a new lease on life sometimes, because sometimes you're just so buried, there's no way of you getting out. And I talk to my clients and I'm like, usually it takes them a lot of fighting and trying before they come to me. And I talk to them and I realize that, you make $50,000 a year, you have 2 kids. How can you pay back $50,000 with a credit card at an interest rate of 16 to 20%? There's no way. You're not being realistic. And these laws are built here to allow you to discharge because simply you're never going to get out. And we don't want a society where people are just forever indebted. And lastly, one great thing about bankruptcy is it starts you, like I mentioned, a new lease on life. And let's say you become a millionaire like Donald Trump became afterwards. You're not worried about creditors anymore because you were able to discharge them. So you're not held back by anything. You can start over. And it's a great way to start over financially for a lot of people. And there's some stigma to it, but there really shouldn't be because we all need a break here and there. And some of us need financial break. And this is a great way to start over. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to leave a comment. If you like this video, please leave a like button. And I will be back with further content in the future. Thank you very much.